This is going to be a super quick lesson on how to execute a function from an HTML element. Now, typically, there's a lot of better ways to do this, especially when it comes to the DOM and selecting elements and then adding event listeners on elements directly using JavaScript and interacting with the DOM. But in this case, we haven't gotten that far yet, and we want to have an introduction to adding functionality into HTML elements such as buttons. So when you click a button, it invokes a function. And essentially, this is a quick and easy way to do this, where you add an on-click event as an attribute within your HTML element, and then you have the JavaScript code. And in this case, we're invoking function message1, message2, message3. In some cases, you might still see this, and often you won't, because we're trying to separate out the HTML and the JavaScript. So go ahead and try this and add this into HTML. So selecting a button, adding an on-click, and then invoking functions, giving a message1, message2, and message3, and you can output them in the console. We can have various counters that increment. So every time one of the buttons is clicked, it will increment the counter accordingly, and then output the message in the console with all three values. So go ahead and set this up, and I'll walk you through it coming up. So opening up our editor, we are going to have to open up the HTML file. And in this case, we need to add some HTML, and that's going to be some button elements. So it's on click, and then you invoke the function that you want to invoke whenever the button gets clicked. So we've got our button 1, button 2, and button 3. So whatever happens, it's going to happen directly here. A set of counters, so a number of different variables. So declaring a variable and var2 and var3. So declare the three variables, and then take var1 and var2 and var3, and we're going to equal all of them to 0. And then whenever this message gets clicked, let's take var1 and we'll increment it, and then output another function that's going to take care of our console message. And we can duplicate out these functions. So 2 and 3. So those are all going to increase depending on what button gets pressed. And then lastly, let's do our function that's going to contain the message. So for the message, this is where we're outputting the console. We're not passing any arguments into here. Console log, and we're going to output the values of var1 and then concatenate it with var2 and var3. And a quick refresh. So now every time these buttons get clicked, you're going to see that we've got the console messages increasing, and we've got kind of a mini counter going on depending on which button is clicked. That's going to increment the value accordingly, and we've got the content going into the console. And coming up, we're going to use some of this functionality to produce some more interesting stuff with functions. So that's still to come.